Whether you're a beginner or seasoned cook, you've probably made common cooking errors. I know I have. Let's talk about a few of those and how you fix them. And you want to stick around for the last one because I assure you, you're doing it. Come on over.
Making guests feel welcome, one home at a time.
The first one, and probably the most common, is not tasting as you're cooking. I actually work with a wonderful cook in my catering business who doesn't like to taste, and so I'm the one who runs in and tastes it. Now, I want to tell you this, as you're stirring and you're tasting, the minute your tongue touches that spoon is dead to you. You need to get out a new spoon and taste with this one. Nobody wants your spittle on the spoon that's stirring their food. So keep a bunch of spoons next to your pan and just keep tasting. And then you'll notice what's missing. And it's going to be either salt or pepper. Almost 100% of the time, you're missing one of these very common spices. If you're cooking potatoes or pasta in particular, those suck up the salt. So start out with just adding a little bit, okay, stir it in, taste it. This spoon is dead to you. Then, if that's not what it is, maybe it helped, but there's still something missing. It's probably the depth of the pepper. Put some of that in. You can go a little lighter with the pepper. Stir it in, taste it, and that usually fixes your error.
It was an unfortunate error. We're fixing it.
The second most common mistake is too something. Too salty, too spicy, too bland, too thin, too thick.
Thick or thin?
There are simple ways to fix those. First, if it's too salty, and I mean like it tastes like you're licking the ocean too salty, find a potato, do slices of it, and put it into your dish. Potato has a lot of starch in it, and it will absorb that salt as it's cooking. It won't add any extra flavor, but it will get rid of all that salt. You can keep tasting along the way, but it works every time. Now, let's say it doesn't have enough depth. It's too bland. Well, then you're going to add some pepper and just start with regular black pepper. It doesn't have to be fresh cracked like I use, but it needs to be something normal. You can kick it up a notch with some cayenne pepper, but you want to be really careful with that, really careful. But it could just be bland. It's got enough salt, it's got enough pepper, but something is missing. For that, I love to use a zesty Italian blend. It has all kinds of wonderful spices in it, Italian spices, and it kicks it up a notch. And sometimes I like to use the lemon pepper. The acid in here really gives it a good depth. Easy fix. And you can keep trying other spices, but I would stick to pretty normal ones unless you're an advanced cook. Then, let's say it's too thick. Chicken stock to the rescue. Now, we make our own chicken stock here at the Come On Over house. In fact, I did a whole episode on that and we'll link it down below. But chicken stock is a great way to even out a meal, particularly if it's too thick. Then, if it's too thin, you could make a really nice roux or really kind of a flour gravy out of flour and just water. You can also use flour and chicken stock. And you want to get that into a nice kind of runny substance, and you add that to your dish and you whisk it in or you stir it in and you just keep seeing if it will bubble up and thicken up. And you just keep adding a little bit more and a little bit more. Now, when you do that, if you've added a lot of flour, you're going to have to add more spice. It's going to take away some of your spiciness.
Spice up, spice up.
Sometimes a recipe will ask you to simmer something. Simmer your stew or simmer some sort of liquid around a meat or a vegetable. Simmering is not boiling. Now, this is important, particularly if you're using a creamy substance in your soup or your stew or your liquid. You do not want to boil milk, ever. It changes how it tastes. It can make it almost metallic in a way, it's not something you want to do. So you really want to watch your heat. If something is supposed to be simmered, you never go beyond a medium heat. It takes longer to get to that simmer, but then once you're there, you don't want to increase it. In fact, you might want to decrease your heat.
Too hot, too hot, too hot.
You also may not want to put a lid on that pan, because if it's already simmering and you put on the lid, it's trapping more heat, and that might kick it up to a boil. You don't want a boil, very different from a simmer. A simmer will have little bubbles coming up, and it's just on the edge of boiling. It's not really boiling, it's just wanting to boil. And that's when you know you've reached the simmer.
Yeah, but you better simmer down to a slow boil.
If you're a beginner cook, you probably skip a critical step, and that is prepping all your ingredients before you start. Now, I haven't prepped these. I've just shown you how we do it at the Come On Over house. Jimmy and I pretend we're on a cooking show. We actually call each other chef just for, yucks and giggles.
Whoa, mama! Get a room, you two!
But it's really important to have each item measured out and ready to go before you light the fire under your first pan. Here's why. Sometimes the thing you're working on in the pan first just needs to go for a minute. If you don't have that spice or the chopped onion, like we have here, or your spoonful of sour cream, or anything ready to go, that 1 minute could become 2 or 3 minutes. You do not want that to happen. There's a reason our recipe says 1 minute. That means beyond that minute, your recipe starts to take a dive, and you don't want to do that.
Don't take any bad dives, okay?
So let's say your recipe calls for half a cup of chopped scallions. You want to take the time to chop, measure, and put into your bowl. Let's say your recipe calls for a couple of tablespoons or a quarter cup of sour cream. Don't think, I'll just measure it. No. Go ahead and measure it out, put it in the bowl, it's ready to go. Let's say a recipe calls for a half a teaspoon of garlic powder, and a half a teaspoon of paprika, and a quarter teaspoon of onion powder, and an eighth of a teaspoon of basil. You do not want to be prying off the lid, getting your spoon in there. No. That time starts before you ever begin cooking. You also don't necessarily want to combine all of your spices. Sometimes, and I will tell you this from experience, the garlic powder and the paprika need to go in early, but the basil leaves need to go in late. So you keep that separate from your other spices, even though it dirties up a bowl, because you want to just dump that in when it's time. So please prep your ingredients before you even get out the pan and turn on the burner. You will thank me for that later.
Thank you for saying thanks!
And finally, I know you're doing this because Jimmy couldn't believe it when I first told him this. If you're cooking meat, whether you're grilling or roasting or braising or whatever it is you're doing with that meat needs to be room temperature before you start. I know it sounds like it could be scary, like something could go horribly wrong. I'm sure you've heard picnic stories where something sat out too long. No, listen to me. This meat needs to be room temperature. It should be sitting out. Now it can be covered like this. You don't have to open it up, although that does speed up the temperature, but it needs to be sitting out, and literally when you touch it, it does not feel cold. Now sometimes that can just take 15 minutes. Sometimes it can take 30 minutes. If it's just come from the freezer, it will first need to thaw and then get room temperature. So thaw it first in the refrigerator, bring it out, let it sit out on a plate, in a bowl, and get room temperature before you ever work with it. If you don't do that, you risk either not being able to sear it. It won't take the sear because it's too cold, or it may not get done like you want it to, particularly if you grill. If you put cold meat on a grill, the inside of the meat will not finish, and you'll end up charring the outside to get the inside finished. So trust me, just leave it out, get it room temp.
Come on, everybody!
Which of these common errors have you made? I've made them all. Have you? If there are other common errors you've made, just let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear about them and how you fixed them. The second common cooking era.
Come on over. Now go make someone feel special today.